Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Allison Gill, host of the Daily Beans podcast. And thanks to Midas Touch for airing my show here on their network. And thanks to all of you for being here and supporting independent media. As you know, Todd Blanche has been nominated by Donald Trump to be the Attorney General. He's currently the acting Attorney General. And in that vein, he sat for his confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee this past Wednesday. Now, after the hearing, Senator Thom Tillis said that he would not vote him out of committee. He would not vote yes on advancing Todd Blanche's nomination to the full Senate unless and until Todd Blanche met with the Epstein survivors. Now, that was his only caveat. Despite Blanche having been referred to the bar for disciplinary action because he's being investigated, which could possibly lead to disbarment, despite failing to follow a court order issued by Judge Emmett Sullivan in our friend Katie Fang's lawsuit by refusing to hand over documents that should have been released under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Despite being called out by a judge in Miami for colluding with Trump and the IRS to perpetuate a fraud on the court that resulted in the $1.8 billion slush fund that he refuses to rescind in writing under penalty of perjury. And despite his ongoing and prolific cover-up of the Epstein files, meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell, moving her to a low security facility, though he claims he had nothing to do with that. And last week, I showed you here on The Breakdown that the FBI admitted to having training videos instructing FBI analysts on how and who to redact from the Epstein files, constructively admitting that Blanche violated the Epstein Files Transparency Act by failing to release them under Section 8 of that law. Yet despite all the failed weaponized prosecutions against Trump's political enemies and favors for his friends and allies, as orchestrated by Todd Blanche, Thom Tillis, aside from that, decided all he needed to earn his vote, all Blanche needed to earn his vote was to meet with the Epstein survivors. Nothing had to come out of the meeting. There were no other considerations. So how did that meeting go? According to reporting by Midas Touch, let's put this up, Epstein survivor Annie Farmer, who attended the meeting, had this to say, quote, "His evasiveness felt like a deliberate attempt to claim the Attorney General's office is powerless in this matter. By passing the buck once again, he's leaving survivors trapped in the same endless loop of searching for answers and receiving none." Today, I'll speak with Annie Farmer about everything that happened in that meeting and why it shouldn't assuage anyone's concerns about voting yes to advance Todd Blanche, let alone Thom Tillis. Everybody, welcome to The Breakdown. Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Gill. Please welcome Annie Farmer. Hi, Annie. How are you today?
Good to see you, Allison.
It's always good to see you, my friend. It's always good to speak with you. I know we've talked on this show before. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me about this meeting that you attended. And before we get into the details of the meeting, how did you attend this meeting? Was it virtual? Were you in person? How many other survivors were there? What was kind of the setup of this meeting?
Yeah, so there were, I'd say, around 8 survivors that were able to attend in person. They had been there as a part of the confirmation hearings to, speak out about, our feelings that Todd Blanche was not a capable candidate. As you described, this meeting with him came up rather last minute. And so, unfortunately, I think there were other survivors that had already left that were not able to attend. And I was not in DC, so I attended virtually. So it was a rather small group of survivors. Of course, not, it can't be representative of the whole, of all of us. It's too large of a number, but it was many of us who've been speaking out publicly about our concerns with the files and the way that they've been handled.
Now, what was your initial, overall impression having met with the man who you'd never met with before? No survivors had met with Todd Blanche before. He seemed to kind of put on a more cordial face in the hearing room during his confirmation hearing. But what was he like behind closed doors? And did anything he say kind of change your mind on whether or not you would think he would make a good attorney general?
The interaction with him only strengthened my resolve to speak out against his confirmation. Of course, it felt that the meeting, that he was only meeting us because his hand was forced. And so, there was already that sense kind of going into the room. It was very, last minute, it's kind of scheduled on his timeline, not in a way that I think would, make it possible to engage with the largest number of us or give us time to think more about, what our priorities were to communicate to him. So I think already going in, it was, feelings were high, right? Like emotions were running high. And, I think that he could have done such a better job of meeting the moment, meeting those feelings, expressing empathy in a way that was believable and authentic, and, providing some kind of concrete information that would have helped us have any kind of good faith belief that he really was wanting to do better in this case. He in the beginning said he was just there to listen. And, as people went around introducing themselves, there were, of course, questions being raised. So I think we didn't want him to just listen. We had been waiting for a meeting at this level for a long time. And so many of us had questions. And ultimately, speaking for myself, I felt really dissatisfied with the answers he provided. And, as the meeting went on, just kind of the frustration just intensified. And I felt it just was his defensiveness, his, I think, condescension really is what I said in my statement, because there was just a way that he engaged that felt that it was unprofessional in my mind. But he was not at all convincing that he cares about this, about doing better in this case.
Right. And I'm wondering if he took any responsibility. I know during the hearing when, for example, DOJ weaponization was brought up, the blame kept going back to the Biden Justice Department, Jack Smith, the wrongful accusations of weaponization in the previous administration. Did he take any responsibility? Because I know that sometimes they've answered questions about why haven't there been any investigations into, Epstein's co-conspirators or other perpetrators in this matter? And they always say, well, nobody else before us did it. Did anything like that come up? Did he take any responsibility for any failures in the Epstein file saga?
I heard no verbal indications of any responsibility being taken. I think he said at one point, that he agreed that there had been a lot of law enforcement failures in this case. But it was definitely like looking backwards. His focus was on the distant past, and he, and of course there were law enforcement failures all over the place, but he even pushed back on the idea that a lot of those were at the federal level. He's like, well, at the local level and at the, there was a lot of failures here. So he just seemed really reticent to even, own up to me, like the most obvious of errors. And then when it came like down to more specific questioning around around things like investigative leads, he kept kind of going back to the same point that, it was all they needed to see was evidence. And then they were more than happy, we just needed to bring that evidence to the FBI, and then they'd be more than happy to investigate it. And I think that just landed the wrong way with a lot of people, right? And the more he was pushed, he provided, what was a very unsatisfying kind of hypothetical situation that it also felt inaccurate about, like what is necessary to pursue any kind of prosecution of sexual assault. That, I think it just didn't really, none of us were buying. So there's that, that point that was really hard. And then also, of course, I had a lot of specific questions about the Ghislaine Maxwell matter, about his interview, about the prison transfer. He kind of went back to some of his talking points. The threats that she received, which required her to be moved, but he had nothing to do with it. And And when I asked for if it would be possible to release communications around that matter in order to, show what he was saying to be the case, he said that was privilege. There were several things he said were privilege, and it was just, of course, beyond the possibility they could be released. But in speaking with attorneys afterwards, it's like that privilege can be waived, right? And similar to like these kind of documents that the FBI is holding on to in regards to conversations within department about charging Epstein and the types of crimes that he said, we just never release anything of that nature.
And not only can those privileges be waived, they can also be challenged in court under, misconduct or a crime fraud exception. In my case, I know you talked to Caitlin Collins about this on CNN, where they admitted to having these training videos, but they're not releasing them to me because of something, probably called deliberative process privilege. But we've had several examples, as I brought up last week with my lawyer, in the past of deliberative process being overcome. For example, when the DOJ refused to release Bill Barr's memo about Mueller obstruction, because of deliberative process, the judge said, no, that doesn't apply here. There's misconduct, and pulled the redaction bars off, and we got to see what was underneath them. Same with John Eastman's emails. That was a crime fraud exception. But he himself can waive, as you said, that privilege. So it's a very disingenuous and also not in compliance with the law answer from somebody who wants to be the Attorney General. And to talk about no evidence, and we need evidence to open investigations, I don't know of any case where you have more evidence than you do for decades in this particular case, or at least why, like in the Dr. Nassar case with the FBI and the gymnastics, the women's gymnastics, what the FBI and the DOJ agreed to do was to look into why there were delays and problems. They investigated the investigation into that as well. But he is refusing to do that here?
And that was a very specific question that I asked. And I actually used some of the wording he had provided the day before. Of course, he was not talking about the Epstein case. He was talking about something that happened under the Biden administration that he wasn't happy with. But I think he said, I'm trying to see if I can find it. One of the best ways we can make sure we never do again what we did before is by exposing ourselves and letting the American people see what we did. That was something he said, about a different matter. And so I read that and I said, don't you think then, and I confirmed, are you aware of my sister's, FD 71 of this 1996 report? Have you seen the document? He's like, I'm aware of the document. I don't know if I've seen it, but I'm aware of the document. Is that, can't you, in that same spirit, think that it's important to investigate why nothing was done for 10 years with this report and then the subsequent failures that have harmed all of us? And he just, what do you mean commit to an investigation? It was just like flabbergasting to him. And then there was just a lot of talking around and then moving on without ever just being able to even acknowledge that was a problem worth looking into. Right. And so it was just that kind of thing I found extremely problematic,
So he wants to look into failures in the Biden Justice Department, but not anything else or even failures in the Biden Justice Department in the Epstein case. Because as we know, there was an open and ongoing investigation, at least according to a whistleblower, under the Biden administration that was shut down when Donald Trump took over in January. He shut down that investigation in the Southern District of New York, fired the prosecutors, Maureen Comey, one of them, that was responsible for that, then took all the files, sent them over to DOJ and locked a bunch of people in the building and had them start going through them to pull Trump's name out of it. That's well expected, but to say it to a group of survivors who are looking for answers, he didn't even pretend that he cared. And then like we were discussing here, I've actually brought up the lack of consultation with SDNY around the Ghislaine Maxwell interview, which is something that I had been told in my conversation with them when I expressed my concern last summer. And he claimed that was not accurate, that they had been consulted, but couldn't tell me specifically who. I know the prosecutors, and I asked, was that before or after he fired Maureen Comey? And he didn't like that. Oh, no wonder he was
interrupting
bristly.
him.
You're coming at him with facts, Annie. You can't do that. I think you questioned him better than some of the senators in the hearing, if I'm being honest. Let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell for a second, because his answer during the hearings where he said, well, she had a lot of death threats, moving someone who is under threat to a lower security facility is not the way you protect someone who is under threat. You actually put them in solitary or move them to a higher security facility. It didn't really make any sense, not to mention that their own Bureau of Prisons policy says that you cannot move a convicted sex offender or someone with a sex offender status to a low security facility, or Camp Bryan, as it were. Yet you can't. And somebody actually had to go in and waive her sex offender status and change her custody status to out custody in order to get that done. I was the one who published the screenshots
Yes.
of those Bureau of Prisons point screens, they're called, last year on my Substack at MillerShroud.com. And to say, talk a little bit more about the questions you asked about the Ghislaine Maxwell movement, the interview. All of that happened right around the time they put out that July memo saying, we're not going to investigate. There's no client list. Oh, and there was no blackmail anywhere, even though no one asked them about that. That all happened in July of last year, which is also when FBI analysts started to come to me to tell me about their redactions that they made to the files in the spring. So talk a little bit more about some of the things you asked him or the discussions you had with him about Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, I mean, I introduced it by just trying to kind of, come at it from a human perspective. Like, the government asked me and 3 other women to be witnesses in this case. It was extremely stressful. And I think that, some of the stress from that really was harmful to one of those women in particular. And so, I just tried to paint a human picture of why it would be so upsetting then to find out about this interview. And again, I felt like that was an opportunity for him to just acknowledge that, but instead he went straight to defensiveness, and, took issue with me saying there was not consultation with government prosecutors. And then when I tried to drill down again, it was just very vague. He had consulted with victim attorneys but he could never name specific names. And many of those victim attorneys were in the room. So I thought it was interesting which of these people did you consult with is what I wanted to say, but we had limited time. And then when it came to the matter of the transfer, he fell back on the same argument, which you've highlighted makes no sense. And I think is very unsatisfying to most people if it's about threat. But he just said, this is a Bureau of Prisons matter. And of course I have no, influence over that basically. And that's when I said, well, can we see the communications about that? And then he said, well, that's privileged. And I don't even know what kind of communications that exist around that, which also seemed, kind of contradictory.
Well, somebody had to tell somebody to waive a sex offender status in the Bureau of Prisons point screen so that she could be moved. Somebody had to do that. And only, from my understanding, from my contacts and sources at the Bureau of Prisons, it has to be a director level situation at BOP. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't just do that on their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I mean, I that's why I just said, I felt these were unsatisfying responses, right? It's like, okay. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else related to that matter. I mean, we were told we had 30 minutes. There was a lot to cover. So it was kind of hard to.
They only gave you 30 minutes?
That was what I believe it actually did go longer than that, but towards the end, it was, very clear. He had another engagement and he needed to leave. And there was a lot of, at that point, I think, kind of a lot of people talking. I think that the frustration was building and a lot of sense of, what's happening here. He, when we're talking about the issues around, how survivors had been harmed by the problems with redactions and information coming out. Again, it was sort of like a blank response, and the idea of kind of like making, basically what the damage that's done is done. Sort of like, well, are there still names up? We can take them down. But I mean, I think everyone realizes how silly that is in this day and age. Like, once information has been released, I mean, it's great to not continue the harm by continuing to have it on the website. But, some people have had their attorneys contact the DOJ, like, 4 or 5 times around, like, no, it's still up there.
There's still stuff that's up there.
Right. Yeah. It's still stuff. Right. And so just this idea that, that like, okay, well, if we take it down now, it's undone. Of course that's not true. And there was, he seemed to be, bringing in someone that has a lot of experience within the sex trafficking unit, as the point person, and did not, it was sort of like, okay, this is your person now, right? I'm not really, there's not much like I can engage with on this matter. So I kind of felt like he was missing the point in a lot of ways. But interestingly, he, after, saying, oh, this doesn't need to be contentious. And I mean, it's okay if you're angry, but obviously not responding well if anyone was angry. He then wrapped up by saying, well, this was a great meeting. Were you in this meeting? Because I know a lot of people did not walk out of the room feeling very good. And I think, people cried, people were pretty upset. So, it was not a great meeting.
No. And it was a re-traumatization lip service meeting to get Thom Tillis's vote is what it was. And, I would be like, where's our $1.776 billion fund? For this. Anyway, when he said, I think some of the big breaking news that came out of this meeting is that he actually said, I can't open an investigation. I'm just the attorney general. What was that in response to? Was that in asking to open an investigation into co-conspirators, asking to open an investigation into why these investigations were closed? Like a Dr. Nasser thing? Like, what was that in response to? Do you remember?
I don't remember specifically. I mean, I think the general feeling was, or generally like his sentiment was, it needs to come, this information just needs to be taken directly to the FBI.
We did that decades ago.
And it's not a good enough thing to say, we've already done it and we're tired of doing it. Well, then I can't help you because, and so I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I think people were, trying to drill down on, well, can you explain specifically about what would be needed then? Because it feels like there's a lot of information there, right? It should be enough. And again, that's where he got into this kind of hypothetical where it seemed like he was, I mean, it seems like so over the top, but I basically, he was saying, let's say, I can't remember the name he used, but let's say Jane is raped, but we just have her word, or I don't know how he said it, but there's not a lot of information there. But then her friend is also raped. Well, now we have corroborating evidence. I mean, it was really insulting, I found. And also it felt inaccurate. And I don't know if what exactly he was implying there is if there's only one victim of sexual assault, that person's word alone would not be enough for a criminal charge. But
well, that's not what happened here.
Yeah. I mean, again, I found it, I felt like he was sort of talking to take up space and try and avoid like answering some of the more specific questions. But, we'll see what happens. As you said, it's still in committee right now. There's 2 senators in particular that we've been trying to like reach out to directly because I think there is maybe perhaps more of an opportunity with them, not being people that are seeking reelection.
Is that Thom Tillis and John Cornyn?
Yes, John Cornyn and Thom Tillis, exactly. And John Cornyn in particular, he has historically a good record on sex trafficking legislation. And I think I'm hoping to appeal to someone's integrity here, because I think it's quite obvious. And you gave so many examples at the top of the show that this is just one of many reasons why he is not a good candidate for the highest law enforcement office in this country. But, I think that there are a lot of people that care about this issue. And I'm hoping if enough people, reach out to these senators, they may feel the pressure and remember this is part of their legacy, and do the right thing. So we'll see.
That's what I'm hoping for too. And I hope everybody watching reaches out to John Cornyn and Thom Tillis to vent their frustration and do it in a polite way, that you'll get more, more flies with honey. But, make sure to bring up the fact that a lip service meeting that, where you were forced your hand shouldn't be the only criteria that needs to be met in order for this person to be advanced to the full Senate for a confirmation vote. And I just wanted to end on this because you and I have talked a couple times before, and both times we talk about how it's not just the traumatization of the assault, right? It is the re-traumatization from institutional failures. And one of your co-survivors who I absolutely adore and hold up as just a super brave person along with yourself is Marika Chartouni. And she had to say this about the meeting. I think she gave this statement to Midas Touch. When institutions fail to address the concerns of sexual abuse victims, the betrayal comes at a much higher price. This perpetuates the cycle of oppression by creating psychological barriers that prevent victims from seeking necessary help, resulting in oppression in its most intimate form, survivors being implicitly and explicitly told that victimization was their fault, that their trauma didn't deserve recognition, and that their recovery wasn't worth institutional investment. Is that how you feel coming out of this meeting with Todd Blanche?
I thought she said it really well. It really was. I think the reason that, people did feel so upset after the meeting was this sense of this was another betrayal, right? And I have to say too, we have, I think some of us have gone into some of these meetings previously, feeling frustrated, feeling upset, and had really different outcomes. There was a meeting with Comer recently, where, there were some frustrations expressed, and he was, I thought, very open, very understanding, and still, was sharing limitations of investigations, being honest and straightforward. We're not naive. We're not expecting people to just, promise things that can't be done. But there's a way of handling these kind of communications that can feel healing or can feel re-traumatizing, like a further betrayal, which I think was what Marika is speaking to here. And I think that's what happened yesterday.
Yeah, at the very least, talk to somebody who's a professional who knows how to not re-traumatize survivors of this kind of thing. And, you've gone through it here with Epstein. I've gone through it with the military sexual trauma, that institutional betrayal upon institutional betrayal. And then the institution refuses to acknowledge the betrayal. And then, of course, they won't even in this case with Todd Blanche, refuses to even look into why or what happened. As great as it would be to have, investigations into these co-conspirators and perpetrators of these assaults, it would be at least something for you to go back and find out why they weren't looked into in a timely fashion in the first place, especially, right. Talking about your sister's 1996 report that sat idle for 10 years. Why did that happen? And to have some sort of an answer or even a Inspector General investigation, and then to talk about maybe recommendations we can make to change in the future to make our institution better at dealing with this kind of thing. But just nothing, just a lip service, check the box meeting to get Thom Tillis's vote is what this sounds like this was.
Yeah, I think he definitely said, I didn't come here to commit to anything. As if by asking him to commit to something, we were really out of bounds. So yeah, it was, I think you summarized it well.
Well, Annie, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I'm so glad that you came and spoke with us today. I appreciate your time. And I just want to thank you and your co-survivors so much for continuing to speak out. It's not easy. I know that. And we appreciate you so much. And I know everybody here. Oh, wait, I'm pointing the wrong way. Wherever the comment section is, I don't know which way my camera is facing. I know everybody here supports you and your efforts as well.
Well, I want to say too, like, the work you're doing has, I think, been really important. With highlighting, this issue around the training videos. I think this is all, makes the case that much stronger. So thank you for that work as well.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. I have done more than the Attorney General nominee for the United States. And I think a lot of us can say that at this point. So everybody, if you get a chance, get a hold of Senator Cornyn and Senator Tillis and let them know that you don't think Todd Blanche is fit to serve as Attorney General, and share some of your feelings. And again, Annie, we appreciate you coming. Thanks to Midas for hosting this show, and thanks to all of you for watching. Everybody, we'll see you next time on The Breakdown.
Breaking news right now, my brothers and I wrote a book. It's called WTF America. And well, doesn't that just say it all? It comes out officially this October, but you can pre-order your copy today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below.